Welcome to Accessible, the podcast that opens the door to disability leaders and their ideas. I'm George Gatto.
And I'm Amelia Reigard.
We are doing something a little different in this special series called Voices of the Network. Over the next few episodes, we will highlight university centers on disability, which are currently facing funding uncertainty in the proposed 2026 federal budget.
We'll explore how these programs came to be, their bipartisan roots in the Developmental Disabilities and Bill of Rights Act, and the impact they have on people with disabilities, families, and communities across the country.
Through conversations with national and local leaders, trainee alumni, and professionals, we'll shed light on the real-world value of USEDS, LENS, and other DD network programs. These are stories of leadership, innovation, and impact.
All right, welcome back, folks. On today's episode, George and Amelia talk with Jacy Farkas from the University of Arizona Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities, one of Arizona's 2 USEDs. Jacy shares how the state's unique geography and cultural diversity really shape their work, from partnering with border communities and binational organizations to engaging with 22 federally recognized tribal nations. They talk about building trusted relationships, centering Indigenous perspectives, and serving as that connector between the university and the community. Their work really exemplifies how USEDs partner to help build capacity within communities to support all people. Okay, here's the show.
Okay, well, welcome back to Accessible. Today we're really excited because we have Jacy Farkas joining us from Arizona. And I think I've mentioned on this podcast before that I went to college in Arizona and was a trainee at the Arizona USED at that time. And then I left and they got another USED. And this is where Jacy is at, down in Tucson. So Jacy, welcome. We're really excited to have you here and to learn more about what's happening in Tucson, Arizona.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, so I guess maybe my first question is, just given my own history, is, um, you know, how did it come to pass that Arizona had a second USED when I don't actually think of Arizona as one of our really huge states. And not that you shouldn't have 2 USEDs, but I think you have a specialized sort of focus area.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to be in that last round when new USEDs were created. And um, I mean, thing is, we are a very large state. Like, just geography wise, it is a fairly large state. And even though there's um, large metropolitan kind of areas, mainly Phoenix, that has a fairly large population. I think Maricopa County is like one of the largest voting districts in the country. Um, and But we have a lot of rural um, areas to our state, and we have 22 federally recognized tribes here as well. So we have a pretty unique kind of geography, makeup, and then we're like right along the border to Mexico as well. So here in Tucson, we're only like an hour away, not even an hour away from the Mexican border. So um, there's a decent amount of diversity when you think about just the geography and kind of unique aspects to the state that I think warrant having another USED, especially with the original, our first USED being up at Northern Arizona University, which is up at the top of the state, versus we're at the southern end of the state. So we work well together and collaborate all the time so we can really address the needs of the whole state.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you the one thing I miss about Arizona, and I loved about Arizona when I was living there, was just yeah, how diverse it is. Like, there's so many different kind of cultural things happening in Arizona. And how does that influence this types of work that you guys do at the Sonora you said?
It influences a lot of the work we do, most of the work we do, actually, and one of the key areas of, I think, that set us apart to get another use set in the state is because of our proximity to the southern border, and we've done a lot of work over the years partnering with border communities and projects that are on both sides of the border, to be honest with you. We have a lot of really good binational partnerships and to address the needs. And a lot of people do go back and forth. And so um, we've done conferences. That the very first one we did on the border, the result was this amazing nonprofit that is binational, that employs people with disabilities and fabricates low-cost durable medical equipment, like Rough Rider all-terrain wheelchairs, things like that, and that's something that came out early on. Um, and then, we have a really cool project that's been going on the last couple of years that involves all of our trainees doing research in border regions to really just highlight and amplify the voices of people with disabilities and their families and what it means to live along the border with a disability and how culture and the strengths of community, really influences experiences there. And so digital stories come out of that project, which is really great. Um, and that we have trainees working on that and engaging in some of that identity kind of research along with that. Um, Kind of also more of a health humanities kind of lens, how we approach that project too. But then in the last few years, the last 5 years, we've really made a more concerted effort in addressing, some of the identified needs that tribal members have brought up related to disability. So we have almost like you can think of it as like a subcenter, but the Circle of Indigenous Empowerment, where we're kind of a hub of resources and information, but working closely in partnership with tribal nations and other urban Indians here in Arizona to um, address community identified needs around disability and what kind of resource could be helpful and how we can bridge some of the state and tribal resources to really support people. For example, our young people with disabilities in that transition from school to work.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
What are some of those needs that come out of those communities that you're working with that you guys are collaborating on right now? You mentioned a transition to work, right? But
Yeah, transition work's a big one we're working on right now. Yeah, but yeah, there's some other things, especially related to um, health and access to health care, health resources and information. Um, we have a monthly uh, webinar series that comes out of the Circle of Indigenous Empowerment that are really based on what we hear from the community of what they want more information about. Sometimes it is about having better understanding of some of the state systems and how those can bridge and partner with the tribal systems on each nation because they're a sovereign nation and they have their own programs. And we have out of the 22 tribes, 6 of them have, tribal VR programs, and so how
Oh,
the state and tribal VR can really work together for successful outcomes for youth and adults. Um, so it's trying to be more of a facilitator, if anything, and follow the lead of what, communities are really, um, concerned about, but also building off of some of the amazing work that they have going on their nations as
mhm,
well.
mhm. Yeah, we had a earlier conversation with, Eric Kurtz from, South Dakota, and we're asking him a little bit about how he engages with the tribal communities and in South Dakota, and it's just so interesting, not something we have, the opportunity to do in Missouri, but, how are some of those ways that you are really specifically engaging with, those communities?
Well, a lot of it is relationship building, and we spend a lot of time in those communities. So we have a great team of folks who are part of our Native initiatives, but also from some of our other teams, depending on the kind of needs and work that's going on, whether it's employment or transition. And we're spending time in those communities, getting to know folks. Also, one of the things we really try to do is that not limit outreach to just disability specific types of events. So whether it's a powwow or other community things going on, to have a presence there and get to really know people and build those relationships. Um, we've been working closely with a lot of the high schools in some of the work right now. In addition to the tribal VR programs, it's kind of where we've been spending a lot of our time given um, some of our current projects, but a lot of it really is relationship based, and that we hire people from those communities to also work with us to engage in that work. So it's helping to build some of that capacity right in those communities is a big part of that.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah. One of the things we've been talking about in this Voices of the Network series is um, just how USEDs have had to pivot a bit to communicate and talk about themselves, right? Because as network builders, right, as relationship builders, we are often behind the scenes elevating the work of the people that we are our partners, right? The people that we're working with, and so when you think of all the unique things that your USED's doing, how have you how have you guys communicated, or how are you communicating to Arizona or the community about your value and what you can do and bring um, for the people that you're serving?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I feel like it's given current circumstances, but it's also just changed over time, where there's times where we were like, do we really need to say "you said"? We even dropped it off of our name officially by our community advisory council because of the how broad our work had gotten. Um, but most people just don't understand what a "you said" is, right? And so some of that is, well, how can we just talk about the work we can do and show up as being a good collaborator and community partner and a trusted partner to engage in, um, whether it is, needs assessments and research, but developing some of those model programs in partnership with folks. I think one of the things that we've always done really well is our outreach and resource information pieces of our center. We've done a lot of community based work compared to probably research over um, the span and life of our center so far. I feel like I guess it's more so being a good collaborator and a steward of the messaging, right? And I know for myself, since I've only been in the director position now for, oh gosh, I guess it's going on 3 years now, but I've been with our center from the beginning. I was like our second staff person hired back when we started as like a part-time admin assistant. And so I'd had like every role you can think of at the center, right? And so I've got to really grow with the center professionally. And so it's I just think about the way, like, really wanting to make sure, at least how from my perspective, is we don't we're there to help facilitate and bring um, resources that maybe some communities may not typically have access to, and help build those capacities, whether it is to um, create new knowledge or information that just maybe has not been available, um, or best practices and programs, but also balancing that with what already works for a lot of communities, and that we're not imposing like our way is the right way to do it. And so I really feel like we are there to be a good um connector and collaborate. And I think I've always described USEDS as being that bridge, um, you know, between academia and the community. I remember being at one of the early USED leadership academies, and they said, draw what your like the center means or is to you. I think every other person did something much closer to like an org chart. Mine was a picture of a bridge, literally. And like the community and the university and the kind of resources and how we can leverage the strengths of both to address the needs the community has. And so that's how I've kind of continued the work I do personally and what I feel
Yeah.
like the ethos of our center really is.
Yeah, I actually in some ways we jumped the gun a little bit, but
I'm sorry.
no, it's my fault, it's my fault. But, I actually would love to hear because I think you have such a cool story in terms of your career within our network and within your you said about so, I guess just if you could talk a little bit about going back to you and how you got into our field and then, became, began working at the USED all the way, through the different, jobs that are offered there.
Yeah. So it was honestly happenstance. I fell into the field. Um, I was working on my master's at the time in information resources and library science. I had a whole completely different career path in mind. But the center, the USA had just started and they were hiring for a half-time admin that had full benefits. I'm like, yes, because I'm 23 and I'm about to lose my healthcare benefits for my parents, and I have tuition, as a grad student. Like, this sounds great. So I applied and got the position. And it just over time, I think a big piece of it is just having more exposure and the more learning that I did through our programming that it ended up changing my my career path. I was also in our first cohort of trainees since I was also working on my master's at the time and started working on um, more about accessibility, information accessibility, and both digital and kind of just access to information in various ways. And I think just between that and the more I learned and being able to see disability more as um, not just a social construct, but also from a similar perspective of us as other marginalized communities that I hadn't really even though I had family members, like, that had disabilities, I just didn't think of it in that way, right? And, um, and so for me, it was really that alignment and then looking at where people are multiply marginalized. I think that's where a lot of my work focuses now, um, because of that. And so, yeah, I fell in love with the work. Person-centered planning is what did it for me. I started doing that and working with youth, and, because we had a lot of turnover, I stepped in, and then there was no looking back, and now, what is it? Almost almost 19 years later? It'll be 19 years in February. Yeah, is, I really fell in love with the work and the mission, and I think it's having the best of both worlds that you get to be with community but also have the resources of the university that, um, keeps it exciting and fresh for me and why I enjoy it so much.
That's very cool. Um, I had this, I mean, not a similar trajectory, but just also was in college, getting my undergrad and then got hired. I was like, oh, I need a job, start as a student. And then you kind of learn about this whole world. I mean, like, no one, I don't think many people are like, I'm going to grow up and work at a USED because it's like, what is a USED, right? That trajectory is not really like laid out before you, but then once you find out, or once you kind of get in the network and discover all the opportunities and the ways to make impact and to use your various skill sets, it's really neat. Um, there was something that you said, JC, and there I went on my rant and then it left my head, but I'll it'll come back to me. Oh, yeah, it was about you were talking about being a trainee, and so I just wonder if you'd talk a little bit about, um, the value that getting to work with students, like, being connected to the university and the value and kind of talking about some of the things you mentioned, disability as a construct, learning about, the intersection of multiple identities that are marginalized and how learning those things impacts what they're gonna take into whatever field or discipline or job that they have in the future. I wonder if you just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I've seen our trainee program completely evolve and change over time. What started as a little seminar for like 4 of us in the first cohort, where now we have so many, training programs and, the a good chunk of the years, that I've been here. I was our training director and overseeing that as a former trainee, and so, was I think having that perspective was really helpful because I think some of the things that we're able to share and what we really I would say so we're kind of in a unique situation in a way. So we're in the College of Medicine and we're in the sit in within the Department of Family and Community Medicine, but we are not our own academic unit for typical university, academic coursework. We do have an undergraduate certificate in developmental disabilities, and we have some fellowship programs and things like that. But the way we've always operated is pulling students and really recruiting students from all disciplines across campus and not necessarily focusing on ones that tend to just lend itself towards disability, like whether it's special education or um, speech language and hearing sciences, like they are a part of our trainees, but I think where we've really tried to um, be intentional about our recruitment are some of those disciplines that aren't typically seen or people may not be thinking of disability. And to show that it is in aspects of all of and just life in general, right? And I think sometimes we just don't always think you don't have that level of exposure. And so for us, it's how can we introduce not only some of the key constructs and foundational kind of information related to disability in a very applied kind of way um, that can be applicable to any fields, but then what that might look like in research and practice and policy is how we really kind of frame a lot of our programming. Um, and we have been integrated more into doing work with the health sciences and with the new bachelor's in medicine that our college has. W I'm not even sure how it happened, but, like, our core course for our certificate became a required course for these students, so every medical undergraduate student is taking a disability perspectives course, which, is always, like, really cool, and getting to hear, just see kind of even some of the evolution of how they think about and talk about disability changes over the course of the semester, which is really a lot of fun, actually. I really enjoy teaching that class, but I feel like I went and took like a whole I'm not even sure I fully answered your question.
No, it's great. I think it's yeah, it was a great response. I love that thought of like, you know, thinking cross disciplines and not just, oh, one's related to health or one's related to disability services or education, but looking at all disciplines and saying this is disability is going to impact every family, all socioeconomic statuses, classes, races, all of that. And so just thinking about how anyways, I think that's awesome is thinking about what, other disciplines maybe need to know. I remember I was a sociology undergraduate. And I remember there was one of the courses, one of like the introductory level courses, and the med students were required to take it. And I remember most of my classes were really small. Like there's not many sociology majors, right? But this one's like in a huge lecture hall and there's a lot of people. And I'm like, oh, it's because it's all the med students have to get some kind of humanities or
Mm.
credits. And so it was really interesting to be in the same classes with them and have discussions around, social identities and things like that because, we're just coming from different lenses, but how powerful for students to have exposure to different disciplines and what that can do for the way they practice or do whatever work
Mhm.
in their field. So I'm really interested in your disability perspectives course and how you got that as kind of a requirement for your med students. What um, a powerful thing for them.
Mhm. Yeah, that would be an awesome course. I wish we could get some of our, at least, one of our courses, connected to the, med school here. That'd be great. I get to go and give a talk, and I think it might be every year I go and do a one-hour talk at the med school about disability, and, that might be all that those students get throughout their whole medical school career. I don't know, but, I just feel like what a great thing it is that you get to do that. Um, so, um, So when you think about some of over the past, say, I don't know, since you've been director or at Sonora, what are some of the projects that you guys have done that you feel like have had uh, a really big impact or somehow have been meaningful to you or in the communities that you work with?
I'm gonna take one little step back just to kinda give a little bit of context for
Yeah.
some of the examples I'm gonna give.
Uh-huh.
So, when we became a center, we really focused on, initially, really youth to adult transition to end of life because the other youth at the time really focused more on early childhood. And so we really took that approach. I mean, and we do a little bit of early childhood these days, but we probably still, even though we take a lifespan approach, focus more on into adulthood to end of life. And life transitions has always been a major part of the work we do. Employment has always been a cornerstone of the work we do. And of course, health and wellness, given where we're situated, has always been a really important focus area for us. And then working in partnership with, diverse communities and inclusion in that way. And so, I mean, when I think about probably where our center has had, um, a lot of impact has been in relation to our transition and employment programs. We have the statewide license for coordinating project search in our state. Um, we have a close partnership with our vocational rehabilitation, um, state agency in helping to lead Employment First initiative, in the state.
Mm,
And so I feel like we've had, and we do some work in pre-employment transition services for more model development and working with schools and things for work-based learning. So I feel like we've had a lot of effort and where we've seen some outcomes in that employment arena, and that are
mhm.
and that we continue to really, um, try to bring in other partners and work closely with communities to look at systems change, policy aspects also of that, and how we can really promote employment for everyone.
Yeah. What are some of the greatest challenges to integrated employment that you guys are encountering in your area? 'Cause I wonder if they're universal. You know, we have some very specific things here in Missouri that we are always trying to solve, but
I mean, I think there's always still the just attitudinal aspects to that, whether it's from whether it's employers or whether it's even within some of the disability systems themselves, honestly, what might be possible. Um, and, everyone agreeing on some of the same definitions for things can also sometimes be a barrier. But, I think it's probably a lot of the similar challenges that are happening everywhere. But at the same time, I think one of the things that I've been noticing lately is really an effort for more collaboration across different sectors and how we can really have more joint messaging and education um, to help move some of that forward.
yeah. I think that's so important. We just finished doing our, statewide needs assessment, with our DD council, Developmental Disabilities Council in Missouri, and I was, a little bit surprised, but, that when we asked people with disabilities, what are the things that that you want, but that you need more information on or you need more support to get them. And, like, the top 5, every single one of them had to do with some level of community integration. You know, like, I wanna have friendships in the community. I wanna be able to access parks and recreation activities. I wanna yeah, uh, anyway, I'm gonna I can't remember all of them, but anyway, the thing was it was all about community engagement. And, it just struck me that, like, this is something a problem maybe that we could actually fix. And if we collaborate with and all those community entities and say, "Hey, can we help you, um, figure out how to bring people with disabilities or include people with disabilities in your programming?" Um, and anyway, I don't know why I'm going off on this other than something you said just made me feel like that is so important, and I feel like it's an area where we, at least in Missouri, could be having more of an impact in terms of helping get people engaged, not just with work, but with just their communities overall.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's something, JC, I think the example you gave about the youth transition to employment work is a really good example of how um, USEDs are really uniquely positioned. They're outside of maybe like a state agency system, um, or well, they're in a university, but it's not an academic program per se, and they're really meant to bring together community partners to have some complex conversations about, I mean, the alignment on definitions of what do we mean. I sort of think that's like a huge undertaking to take multiple agencies and groups together and say, like, what does transition mean? What does this mean? And what when service plans or goals are all made on these words and everyone has a different understanding of it or different idea of what the success or the outcome is going to be, it's hard for partners to talk and collaborate. So I think that's a really great it's a great work that you guys are doing and a good example of how USEDs can be almost these neutral conveners where it's like, let's all get together and like figure out, because we all, mostly at the end of the day, we all want the same outcome, right? So it's like, how do
Right,
we
yeah.
work together, speak the same language to get to that outcome? So yeah, anyways, it sounds like you guys have great work in that area of youth transition. Um, I guess, JC, I'd ask in, part of the reason why we started this Voices of the Network series and we're talking to different USEDs to learn about the unique and cool projects and things they're doing is I'm really wanting to underscore the value of having this federal designation as a USED that allows us the freedom to do some of those things that you guys are working on, right? So I wonder if you'd respond a bit to like what would it mean for people with disabilities and families and communities in your area, right, in Arizona and the border towns, if you said weren't here, right, if you weren't able to do that work, what would that mean?
I mean, I do think it kind of going back to something you said earlier, like, we are sometimes in that unique position that where state agencies' hands were tied that they can't really do, right? And that we can maybe step in and find a more innovative solution or a a bit of a out of the box thinking on how we can help address an issue. Um, with if we didn't have our centers, that piece would, I think, be missing. Um, and I do think the fact that I'll be honest, I'm having a hard time, like, conceptualizing or thinking of this as, like, what it would mean to, like, take it away versus, like, what value do we bring? Because I feel like I mean, I there was another you said before we were here, right? I think it'd be a little different coming from a perspective of a state that, I mean, we'd be losing 2 here in Arizona if that were to happen, and, those are a lot of resources that that we wouldn't be able to pass on to other communities. Then sometimes it is through that partnership where some communities can't access necessarily because of how things have been structured for so long that maybe not be in a position to access some of those same resources, funding sources that we can do that in partnership and be able to really share those resources with communities. Part of our work is to really help build capacity in those communities and share the resources that we have and bring it to those communities. Um, and so I think that would be definitely be a piece that would be a gap for that. Um,
Well, and a lot of people that I just think this is really great, but a lot of people use that same sort of analogy that you talked about, and that a lot of times the USEDs serve as a bridge between the state and the communities, or the university and communities. And I mean, that's just what we do really well, and is kind of serve as that connector. And so in some ways, I think that would be lost. But I think of the you said at University of Arizona, and I just think it's such a great thing, because having been in Arizona for a number of years before that you said existed, there were so many things that I could see, particularly around the tribal communities, around, the whole border area, and uh, just people who English wasn't their first language. I think there were just so many, they're impacted by disability, and so they weren't being included to the extent that I'm sure they are now in these conversations. That bridging wasn't happening in the same way that I'm sure it is happening under your leadership at Arizona.
Thanks, George. Yeah. I think I will say that I'm going to toot the horn of our whole DD network in Arizona because we all play really well in the sandbox together. We like working with each other, and we've really leveraged all of our resources together to address some of the things that you're talking about. And that I think has really made a difference in not just our DD network, but also working closely with some of the other um, broader disability networks with our independent living centers and things. And so I do feel like in the last 5 to 10 years, there's really been this concerted effort around outreach and trying to get out to rural and a lot of the, more underserved communities and, addressing the needs of the full state and not just the corridor that
Yeah,
goes from
yeah,
Tucson to Phoenix to Flagstaff. And so, I think that, there's been a lot of great collaboration and leveraging of the resources across all of those programs that has really made a difference.
yeah. I love it. Oh, it's just making me think of all those road trips that I used to take from Flagstaff to Tucson. It was great. Um, anyway, well, JC, it's been just a pleasure having you on and hearing more about what you guys do. If people want to learn more about your center or more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to our website, at sonorancenter.arizona.edu, and we're on all the socials. Our center, we're on all of them. So you can find us on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. And so, yeah, we'd love for you to reach out.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna. We've been trying to get Catherine has been working really hard to get us more engaged in all the socials as well. So we'll definitely make sure that we're connecting.
Thank you, Jacy. It's been nice to chat with you this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, JC.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Accessible. Accessible is hosted and produced by George Gatto, Amelia Reigard, and Catherine Toller from the University of Missouri Kansas City Institute for Human Development, which is the home of the Missouri USAID. Accessible is a joint project between the Missouri USAID and the Missouri Land Program, which is funded by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services through grant number T73MC00022. Episodes of Accessible are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you subscribe to your podcast. Join us next time to hear more insights and ideas from leaders in the disability world.